Now let's go ahead and jump into the effects section of the synthesizer. This is where we'll start to customize our sounds and we can really get creative with how we go about designing patches. Here I have the initialized Groove 3 preset that I created, all queued up. Then I went ahead and loaded up the DigiStrings waveform and moved this over so that way we have a little bit more harmonics to work with than the main default. Kind of gives us the super saw type of tone, which would be great for working inside of this patch. So to enable the effects, all we have to do is go over to the effects section and turn them on or off, depending on which effects we want to use. They have a preset signal flow to keep things nice and simple, so basically everything enters in from the distortion first, and then the last effect is going to be this reverb. So let's go ahead and start off with that first effect, which is going to be our distortion, and this is going to add a tube-like flavor to the different parts of your sounds. So let's go ahead and play our synth. Now we're getting a much more saturated tone. If I want more of that saturation, I can increase the amount. Or I can have this be nice and subtle, just to add a little bit of flavor to my patch. Then we have this tone control, which will basically adjust the darkness or brightness of the distortion. So this effect can be more subtle or a lot more apparent depending on what sort of source material you're working with, but here in our case, it sounds like this. So we get a touch more brightness on the right-hand side when this is set to 50% than we do on the left-hand side, but that'll just depend on the type of stuff you're working with. Then we could use the dry wet mix over here on the right-hand side to blend this in. So this is great for more subtle distortion effects. We can get an interesting color for my sound, and then we can blend that into our original signal. So now it's running a parallel. It gives me the ability to really dial in that texture for my distortion. And that's great because that enables you to use this distortion in a more subtle way if you'd like to. The next effect, which is probably my favorite one, is going to be the chorus. This will emulate a classic stereo chorus effect that's commonly found on a lot of 70s or 80s synthesizers, and this can add a lot of unison and detuning to your sounds, giving them a nice thickness. It's also adding some stereo width. This on keyboard patches, leads, or even bass lines can be really great, and we have a lot of nice customizable controls here. We can adjust the speed of the chorus. Basically, this is adjusting the speed of that modulation. So now it sounds a little bit more watery, but if this is on less speed, we have a slower modulation. Can adjust the width, so if we increase this up, we get a wider sound. If we reduce this, we get a mono chorus. So for us, I like that on 100%, on that super fast rate. Gives me a really cool sound for this lead. Just like with the other controls, we have a dry wet blend, so we can blend this in with our original signal. So we get a lot of creative options from that chorus, especially on keyboard patches. I really like the sound of that effect. Then we have a flanger. A flanger is another type of modulation effect. It gives you a similar sound to a phaser, but it's a little bit more resonant. It sounds like this. We can adjust the speed of that modulation by increasing the speed. So that gives us that kind of psychedelic 70s sound if it's really slow. You can also increase the feedback on the signal. This basically will control the feedback path of the flanger. So basically we get a more intense flanging effect. So especially whenever this is set low with a high feedback, you can really hear the sound of this. It gives you almost this weird like resonant tone to it, where it almost adds this sort of spatial effect too, where it sounds like there's almost like a weird reverb. You could also blend that in with the original signal, which I find out flangers is usually nice to have just a little bit of this. It's a pretty drastic effect on its own, so whenever it's used in parallel, it's a little bit more subtle. It can be really nice on leads. Kind of adds a nice depth to everything. The next control is going to be our delay. This is the first of these spatial effects that are going to add depth to our signals. So this is similar to the filter echo that's inside of Softube's Heartbeat. Basically, it's going to give us a variety of different types of delay sounds that we can add into our signal. So right now that's set super short. We can increase the time. get a half note delay. By the way, you can just look over at this menu on the top to see the different delay values. So we can get something like a 8th note or 16th note triplet. Let's try an 8th note triplet. And right now the delay is going to be louder because that mix is all the way up. Let's go ahead and reduce that to an amount of like, let's say 30 or so. So that way the delay is going to be quieter than the main sound. Now the interesting thing about this knob, the time control, if I put this under halfway, you can see if we take a look at this icon here at the top, it's going to change to millisecond value. So now it's no longer synced to the playback of my song. So depending on the type of delays that you're wanting to get, you can either get synced or non-synced delays. And they made it super easy. You can just do this with one knob rather than having to switch a bunch of buttons. If we want to increase the feedbacks, the length of the delay, the amount of delays that are happening, we just turn up the feedback. Makes those delays longer. Or you can get weird like slap sounds if you turn this down. So this is one of those effects that could be really fun on basically any patch you're creating, especially with that mix control. You can blend this in, use it as like a weird reverb or slap delay, or you can use it as a more subtle effect too, depending on what you need. Last effect that we have here is going to be the reverb. This will add a reverb effect to your synth, which is going to add depth. So now it sounds like it's taking place in an actual large room. Now the first control is going to be the time control, which will control the length of that reverb. So if you have this super short, it's going to give us a small room. If you have this super long, it gives us this large cavernous space. Let me turn that down so that way it doesn't ring out forever. But that's what the time control is going to do. And then we have the tone control. This will give us a filter effect on the reverb. So if we turn this down, we get this filtered darkened reverb. Or if we turn this up, it's going to be much brighter. So there's two different types of effects. So especially with this kind of washy high frequency reverb, is if it's really short, it can add like a weird texture to my sound. Then we could use that mix control to dial this in. So this is going to be our dry signal on the left and our wet signal on the right. So especially like that washy high frequency reverb could be really interesting. This would be the same thing, but with a darkened reverb. So we get a totally different tone just by adjusting a couple of those knobs. So reverbs are really fun, especially once you start combining them with delays. So let's maybe make a nice and long delay. I don't want that modulated for now. Go ahead and turn that off. Maybe have that be a longer reverb sound. And we can get all sorts of interesting combos. Maybe try a nice modulated sound. Maybe some more chorus. Maybe a touch of distortion. Maybe a lot of reverb. And we can get a wide variety of different tones out of a simple synth patch just by playing around with those effects. So you can get something that's more textured and distorted, something that's more modulated by adding in chorus or flanger, or if you want something that sounds like it's taking place in this large cavernous space, you can blend in a little bit of delay and then put a big washy reverb on it to make it feel like it's taking place in some sort of large concert hall. Last control that I want to talk about in this section is going to be this velocity control. If we want to make this velocity sensitive, the whole synthesizer patch, so if I play really quiet, it'll play softer. And then if I play really hard on my keyboard, then it's going to play a lot louder. We can go ahead and turn that on here. So that is an option with the synthesizer, especially if you're making like keyboard patches and stuff, this can be helpful. All right, so that wraps up the effects section on the synthesizer. Hope you enjoyed this video. In the next videos, we'll start taking a more detailed look at how to create our own patches from scratch and combine each of these different sections together to make some cool patches with the synthesizer. Thanks for checking out this video. I'll see you in the next one.